Welcome to this video, which is an introduction to acceptance research and methodology in the context of energy technologies. My name is Linda Engelmann and I work at the Chair of Communication Science at RWTH Aachen University. This video is a part of a 3-video series recorded for the eCOCO2 project, a Horizon 2020 project that focuses on the direct electrocatalytic conversion of CO2 into chemical energy carriers. Before we get started, let me show you the contents of this video. First, I'm going to talk about why it is important to study acceptance, for example, acceptance of innovative energy technologies. Second, I'll tell you a bit more about the challenges of acceptance research. And finally, we'll have a look at the ways we can study acceptance. Let's start with the first question. Why do we study acceptance? Before we dig into why acceptance research is important, we have to understand what acceptance is. From a social scientist's point of view, acceptance can be defined as the active or passive approval of the development, implementation, and use of technologies and products. It aims at understanding human requirements for innovations. These include, but are not limited to, individual needs, societal constraints, and organizational settings. Additionally, acceptance reflects these requirements during an innovative technological development and rollout. In this regard, technology acceptance modeling has a long history and deals with complex human decisions. While making these decisions, individuals weigh the perceived possible gains of a technology against its possible drawbacks. Acceptance research therefore aims to timely identify the requirements for socially accepted technology. Ideally, this is done in parallel with the technical development. In this way, an innovative technology can be better adapted to the needs of the public right from the start. When an innovation is introduced, people use their values, beliefs, and norms to develop an attitude towards the innovation. Most often, this happens unconsciously. Generally speaking, if the positive aspects outweigh the negative ones, this will lead to an acceptance of the product or technology. It is important to know here that not all acceptance factors are equally important. It is likely that certain factors weigh heavier for the formation of attitude towards an innovation than others do. It is therefore crucial to learn which acceptance factors may be relevant as well as how they are weighed. The relevant acceptance factors and their weights differ for different technical products, contexts, and users. This is also the case for a situation in which the negative aspects overweigh the positive ones. The consumer will then disapprove of the product or technology and will thus not accept it. It is not hard to imagine that if many people do not accept a product, it will not be used. Consequently, its rollout on the market is likely to fail. Additionally, a non-acceptance could lead to an active rejection of an innovation, which then might be expressed through protests. Altogether, this makes acceptance a prerequisite for the successful rollout of an innovative product, technology, framework, or generally an idea. Looking at the field of sustainable energy technologies, there are numerous examples of projects that failed because they were not accepted and ended up facing opposition. The following are 2 examples of such failed projects. The first example are protests against a carbon capture and storage project that emerged in the Dutch municipality of Barendrecht. The opposition the project faced eventually caused it to be cancelled in 2010. The second example is a protest against wind farm projects in Germany. Such opposition has caused numerous wind farm projects to be halted. If this happens, this also means that the research, investments, and time spent on the project will be lost. So, how can we decrease the chance of wasting resources on an unsuccessful innovation? First, we should start studying acceptance early on in the development process. Then we should keep on studying it throughout the development process. This allows us to keep track on how the acceptance evolves as the innovation further develops. This acceptance research should thereby aim to understand how acceptance is formed. More specifically, it should discover what the drivers behind the acceptance or rejection are. In this way, developers will be able to consider these drivers during the development process. If possible, they can take countermeasures against the acceptance barriers. Additionally, the knowledge is very useful for the innovation's communication. For example, it allows communicators to properly inform affected communities or consumers. That way, these affected communities and consumers are left with a sense of being well informed and part of the process, thus preventing that they feel like they are being tricked into something unsustainable or harmful. Let's move on to the second question. What are the challenges of acceptance research? First of all, it is important to recognize that it does not suffice to merely understand the acceptance by the general public. There are often many more relevant stakeholders whose acceptance is required. A stakeholder is thereby defined as any individual or group that can influence or be influenced by the success or failure of a project. For sustainable energy technologies and related products, the innovation has to pass multiple hurdles before it even reaches the consumer. Besides considering the end user's acceptance, we should also consider the people affected by the technology because of the proximity of their home to the often large infrastructures the technology requires. Additionally, policymakers, distributors, and other stakeholders should be included in the acceptance studies as well. Secondly, acceptance is highly dynamic. This means that people's acceptance of an innovation likely changes over time. These changes can be caused by technological developments and new insights related to the innovation or its branch, but they can also be the result of societal or socio-economic changes. It is therefore not enough to study acceptance at one point in the development process. Instead, it requires longitudinal research starting at the development phase and continuing until it is successfully adopted. Thirdly, acceptance and public communication are often not considered at all. And if they are considered, technology developments as well as further assessments like economic and life cycle calculations are typically first finished before acceptance is considered. We believe that this is much too late. Unforeseen negative evaluations and protests in this final stage will cause stranded investments and might lead to a loss of trust in the product. We want to start studying acceptance as early as possible, preferably right from the start of the technical development. Such early acceptance research allows us to identify the socially accepted pathways for the technical development. In this way, we can circumvent the risk that the technical innovation might be rejected or evoke public protests. Additionally, this knowledge on the acceptance is very valuable information to base communication strategies on. The final challenge is that acceptance research requires the empirical study of the drivers behind acceptance and rejection. However, not everyone reaches their acceptance judgment in the same way. People's judgments are influenced by many personal factors, like their culture, values, and beliefs. In this example, stakeholder A and B both reject the innovation. Nevertheless, the drivers for the rejection of stakeholder A could very well be different from those for the rejection of stakeholder B. Since we cannot consider every single person individually, we need to identify similar groups of stakeholders and explore the differences between these groups. This is especially useful for the innovation's communication. It allows communicators to develop targeted communication strategies that specifically address the communication needs of the different groups. For example, whereas the attitude of stakeholder A might be driven by health concerns, stakeholder B might already trust that the innovation's health safety is ensured. Instead, the attitude of stakeholder B might be driven by doubts about the innovation's sustainability. A communication strategy for stakeholder A would therefore aim to explain why the innovation is not health damaging, whereas the strategy for stakeholder B would rather stress how sustainability is taken into account. Let's get to the final question of this video. How do we actually study acceptance? In acceptance research, we combine qualitative and quantitative social science methodologies. Most often, it is appropriate to base quantitative studies on preliminary qualitative results, as shown in the diagram. But other processes and combinations are also feasible depending on the research question and what is already known from previous empirical work. So, it is always important to first gather literature on the current state knowledge. Using qualitative methods, we then aim to explore acceptance-relevant argumentation lines and important criteria for the stakeholders' perspectives. This includes potential acceptance drivers and barriers. Therefore, in interviews and focus groups, we talk to end users and other stakeholders. Additionally, or instead of this, we might also apply other qualitative techniques like media analysis or retrospectively studying previous acceptance barriers. The results of the qualitative study are then used to develop a quantitative measuring instrument to study the acceptance on a broader scale. This usually takes the form of an online questionnaire. In such questionnaires, we measure acceptance and other useful information. Acceptance is typically viewed as an indicator for the respondents' openness to accept a product and their final decision to adopt the product. In quantitative studies, several approaches to measure this decision can be used, which will be explained in more detail in the next videos, when we also show exemplary results. Dependent on our research goal and question, other information are included into the questionnaire, like the respondents' reasons for their willingness to use a product, the accepted product requirements, and its benefits and barriers. Additionally, we collect personal information related to the respondent. Examples hereof are their highest achieved level of education, experience with the innovation, and personality factors like openness to innovations, technical interest, and risk averseness. This helps us to describe our sample and analyze influences of these so-called user factors on acceptance. Next, we analyze the gathered quantitative data using a large amount of varying descriptive and statistical testing to provide validated results. Using the collected data, acceptance outcomes can possibly be related to perceptions of benefits and barriers, the acceptance drivers. Also, relationships to varying contextual and situational factors, as well as to the more stable individual characteristics, can be analyzed. This knowledge is very useful to engineer requirements for the technology and to design its communication. The data also allows us to uncover reliable user profiles, which can also be addressed in the communication strategies. Using the gathered knowledge, the process then starts again. At the end of this iterative, multi-method process, we now know what the most relevant acceptance drivers are, thereby considering both the positive and negative aspects, how strong these drivers are, and the resulting conditional implementation needs. These can be political, social, technical, organizational, as well as individual, and should be considered for an overall successful implementation. Whether we can distinguish between specific user profiles that should be addressed separately, and communication strategies can be formulated on the basis of the acceptance outcomes, not vice versa. As a final note, a user-centered research design is mandatory. It builds trust in and public intelligibility for novel products. This brings us to the end of our video. Here you see the used references from this video. Thank you for watching this video. You can find more information on the project on our website or on social media, where you find us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Thank you and have a nice day.